Hey y'all, this is Dr. Pamela Riley. I'm a naturopathic physician with over 28 years of experience combining scientific research and biochemistry with a natural approach to health. My goal is always to figure out the cause of diseases and symptoms instead of merely hiding the symptoms. So anyway, this is the last in my series on diabetes, or the last until I decide we need to talk about it some more. So if you're interested in diabetes, feel free to scroll down my profile and find all of the videos I've done about diabetes. So today I want to focus on type 1. Most of the focus in today's world is on type 2 diabetes because it's so prevalent. But unfortunately, there is a rising diagnosis rate of type 1 diabetes as well. And I'm not going to get into all the potential reasons for that, but suffice it to say, we have messed up our food system, we live in a toxic environment, and all of those things negatively affect us physically. So the first, you know what, I wish I had a drum roll and all of the video effects to do a really snazzy top 10 list, but this is just a top 7 list. So anyway, the number one surprising fact about type 1 diabetes is that it is an autoimmune condition. It is not a metabolic disorder. It is an endocrine disorder. Type 1 diabetes occurs when the body starts attacking the beta cells in the pancreas that produce insulin. And so, I guarantee that if you tell someone with type 1 diabetes that if they would just use more insulin, if they would eat differently, or something like that, that would cure their diabetes, they will not respond positively. A lot of people with type 1 diabetes really have an issue with people assuming they have type 2, and with people with no training and no education telling them how to cure their diabetes. I guarantee that no amount of apple cider vinegar, no amount of cinnamon, no amount of whatever crazy cure is out there is going to reverse type 1 diabetes. There are a ton of things we can do to modulate the body and bring it back into balance, but none of those crazy quote-unquote cures are going to eliminate that autoimmune attack. Deeper measures need to be taken in that respect. So my advice, don't ever tell someone with type 1 diabetes how to cure it, because you won't get a positive response. The other thing I would say is that you never ever want to walk up to someone, who has type 1 diabetes and look at what they're eating and say, should you be eating that? I know you have the best intentions, and that's beautiful, but when you ask someone, especially an adult, if they should or should not be eating something, basically what you're expressing to them is that you don't believe they're smart enough to take care of themselves, or that you know better than they do how to take care of a condition that they deal with every single day. And so again, I'll be honest, there are a fair number of people with type 1 diabetes who have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because people don't treat them with respect or make huge erroneous assumptions. So we can eat whatever we darn well please. Now, should we have chocolate eclairs and hot chocolate and bonbons for breakfast every day? Of course not, but neither should you. So don't, let people with type 1 diabetes enjoy their life and enjoy their food. It's okay for them to eat it. I'm not going to get, the dietary recommendations I make for people with type 1 diabetes, I'm not going to go into that. But don't be their judge and jury. That's what I'm trying to get to. The other thing I would say is when someone, if it comes up in conversation that someone happens to have type 1 diabetes, your response should not be, oh no, I am so sorry. We are not at death's door. We are not sick. Most of us are living vibrant, full lives, and just abundantly full lives. So don't assume that having type 1 diabetes stops us from doing anything, because for most of us it does not. And you know what? There are genetic differences in everybody's bodies. So there are a few people with type 1 diabetes who have limitations. And God bless those people. But don't assume that that's all of us. A lot of people think that we walk around with like syringes for arms and legs and a pill bottle for a head. And that's not us. We are living and doing it abundantly. So again, just a lot of assumptions. And along that same line, there are a lot of people, or I won't say a lot, but there are several people that I've known for a very long time. And when I run into them, the first question they ask is, "Oh, how's your diabetes?" And so for those people, I will never be Pamela Riley. To those people, I will forever be Pamela the diabetic. So diabetes is not our identity. Yeah, it's something we control. And you know what? People with nearsightedness wear glasses to control it. And I realize diabetes is more involved. But you would never get it set in your head that, oh, poor Jake, he's nearsighted. You would never make that their identity. So don't assume that diabetes is all we are, because that's not true. When people's first question to me is, "How's your diabetes?" I'm like, well, first of all, it's not mine. And then I always wonder, wow, they didn't ask about my kids. They didn't ask about my husband. They didn't ask about any of my 3 businesses. They didn't ask about the books I write. Why on earth is diabetes the most important thing to them? Because it ain't the most important thing to me. So, and I get that there are a lot of people with type 1 diabetes for whom diabetes is their identity. It's all they talk about. It's all they focus on. And that breaks my heart. But don't make diabetes their identity in your head, because that's not fair. So the other thing I would say, so I think we are up to 5. Diabetes doesn't follow the rules. And so I know the textbook says that if we take this amount of insulin and we eat this many carbohydrates, we should wind up with a perfect blood sugar. Our bodies don't always work that way. So the fact that someone with diabetes has an unusually low blood sugar and doesn't anticipate it, not unusual. A lot of things affect blood sugars. And maybe I should do a video about that. The fact someone suddenly spikes to a sugar of 300 without eating or anything else, it happens. So when people have unusual lows or unusual highs, don't assume that they're not taking responsibility. Our bodies are incredibly complex creations. Hormones can affect blood sugars. Emotions can affect blood sugars. All sorts of different internal mechanizations in the body can affect blood sugars. So the fact someone has a day where they don't have great control doesn't mean they're not trying. Please don't judge them. Life happens. Unusual lows and unusual highs happen. It's not, we do the best we can to control diabetes, but sometimes we get surprised, and that is perfectly normal. Okay, so moving on to number 6 on the list. There is no such thing as good or bad diabetes. I often hear people say, "Oh, he had the really bad form of diabetes." Or someone will say, when they find out someone's a type 1, they'll say, "Well, is that the bad type?" There is no good or bad. No forms of diabetes are less quote unquote bad than any others. They all have risks. They all require lifestyle changes. So get over this belief that there are varying degrees of severity of diabetes. They all demand attention immediately. So I will say there are people who have more fluctuations in blood sugars than others. There are people who respond more dramatically to highs or lows in blood sugar, but that doesn't mean that they have bad diabetes. They just have diabetes, and for them, it's a little bit trickier to control. And so, last and final on the top 7 surprising facts about diabetes is that people with type 1 diabetes typically have just as much insulin resistance as people with type 2 diabetes. And when I talk to people with type 1 diabetes, and if I'm working with someone as a client, and I say, well, we need to focus on your insulin resistance, 9 times out of 10, the first thing they say is, oh no, I'm type 1. I don't have insulin resistance. And that's not true. The issue is that a healthy pancreas generally secretes between 25 to 30 units of insulin. So that's what's quote unquote normal. And as someone starts developing diabetes, as someone with type 2 starts to develop insulin resistance, those levels rise. However, people with type 1 diabetes, most of the people I work with take anywhere from 100 to 300 units of insulin per day. So of course they have insulin resistance. Their body cannot use that much insulin. It's not designed to. It's not made to. Even I work very hard to use less than 30 units of insulin a day. And, 14 days out of 15, I do that with no problem. And my A1Cs run around 5.5 to 5.7. But even then, if I go through a phase where I need a little bit more insulin, I can tell I develop insulin resistance and my insulin sensitivity drops. So when I work with people with type 1 diabetes, I encourage them to make dietary changes that mean they don't need to take as much insulin. And they work with their physician to adjust their dosage. And my goal is, if we reduce our body's resistance to insulin, then we need significantly less, basically. And as I've said before, insulin plays a very important role in the body, but it is highly inflammatory, and it speeds up the aging of our cells and our bodies ultimately. So all type 1 diabetics, their first and foremost focus should be maintaining normal sugars. But for me, the second most important thing is to maintain normal sugars using as little insulin as possible so that the risk of developing insulin resistance becomes lower. So anyway, those are my top 7 surprising facts about type 1 diabetes. I hope you learned something from this. Feel free to ask questions down below. And have a glorious day. Take care. God bless.